You are going to burn with this house, you cursed old woman. That was the last sentence I heard before I saw the flame ignite. My son, Robert, had eyes filled with a hatred I didn't recognize. He was holding a matchstick between his fingers, and in that instant, I knew it wasn't a threat. The smell of gasoline already hung in the air. I felt my heart pounding hard against my chest as the fire began to bite at the living room curtains. I heard the click of the front door locking shut. I heard his car driving away, and for a moment, I stood still, watching the shadows of the fire dance on the walls. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just took a deep breath and touched with a trembling hand the small bulge I had hidden beneath my dress. It was my secret, my salvation, my justice. The smoke began to climb the staircase, slowly like a monster searching for air. I knew I had little time, but I also knew I couldn't die yet, not without putting everything in its place. Before I tell you what I did that night, I want to extend a very special invitation. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment down below what city you are watching us from. Now, let's continue. The first time I met fire, I was 7 years old. My father burned the fields to renew the soil, and he told me, "Don't fear the fire, Mary. Fire only destroys what is useless." I never forgot those words. And that night, as the heat brushed my skin, I knew fate was repeating the lesson for me. I moved slowly, covering my face with a damp handkerchief. The flames were already licking at the dining room furniture, and the ceiling was creaking with a sound that hurt more than the heat. I knew every corner of that house. I had built it with my husband, James, brick by brick. Every wall held memories, laughter, and wounds. And now it was all falling apart before my eyes, reduced to smoke. But it wasn't the fire that hurt the most. It was the betrayal, the look in my own son's eyes. Cold, empty. I never thought ambition could rot someone's soul so deeply. I walked with difficulty to the back room, where I kept a metal box under the floorboards. Years ago, when James was still alive, he had told me in secret, "If things ever get bad, hide this, Mary. No one should see it until it's necessary." That box was my treasure and my burden. And that night, as the fire roared around me, I knew the time had come. I knelt, lifted the boards, and pulled out the box. It was hot to the touch, but intact. Inside there were documents, photographs, letters, and something else, something Robert should never discover. The smoke was already burning my lungs. My throat was stinging, but I couldn't stop. I took a scarf, wrapped the box, tucked it under my dress, and held it against my stomach. Then I opened the bedroom window and jumped. I fell onto the damp earth of the yard, rolled, and covered my face. The fresh air rushed into my lungs like a second chance. The neighbors arrived minutes later, shouting, throwing buckets of water, calling the fire department. They found me barefoot, covered in ash, with my eyes open but tearless. "My God, Mary, what happened?" shouted Mrs. Johnson, my neighbor. "An accident," I lied, my voice shaking. "I think it was the gas." No one suspected. No one imagined it had been my own son. And I didn't say a word, because if life had taught me anything, it was that silence sometimes screams louder than the truth. The firefighters took almost 1 hour to put out the flames. When the smoke cleared, my house was a black ruin, a skeleton of what was once my home, and among the wreckage I saw Robert return. He came running, faking desperation, shouting my name. "Mom! Mom, for God's sake, where are you?" His words were theatre. I watched him from a distance, covered by a blanket. while the paramedics tended to me. He didn't see me, and when he stepped into the destroyed house, his face changed. There, in the doorway of the room, he realized something that made him turn pale, because the fire hadn't reached that area, and the space where the box had been was empty. The following hours were a blur. Hospital, bandages, questions, silence. No one understood how I had survived. I knew. It wasn't luck, it was destiny. The next day, Robert came to see me. His hands were bandaged, a fake injury, surely, and he had an expression that tried to pass as guilt. "Mom," he whispered, "I don't know how this happened. The fire, the gas." I looked at him. His eyes couldn't hold mine. "Don't worry, son," I told him calmly. "Houses can be rebuilt." But a voice inside me whispered something different. "Houses can be rebuilt. Yes, but souls, those are repaid with fire." That night, in the hospital bed, while the wind rattled the window, I touched the bulge under the sheet. The wrapped box was still with me. No one knew. And as I stroked it, I felt a smile slowly form on my lips, because I understood that the fire he had started hadn't destroyed me. It had only ignited mine. I woke up in the hospital 3 days after the fire. The room smelled of alcohol, gauze, and disinfectant, but also of fear. All around me, the white walls seemed to watch me like silent witnesses. The nurse smiled at me, surprised to see me open my eyes. "It's a miracle, Mrs. Mary," she said sweetly. "With what happened, no one thought you would make it out alive." I smiled weakly. A miracle, yes, but not the one they thought. I knew the fire hadn't spared me. It had simply chosen me for something more. The flames had only reached part of the living room and the kitchen. My bedroom, strangely, was almost intact. Some thought it was luck, others, that the firefighters had arrived on time. But I knew the truth. Fire doesn't touch those who understand it. During the days I spent in the hospital, everyone came to see me. The neighbors, acquaintances, even the police. Only one was missing: Robert. My son didn't show up until the 4th day, and when he did, he came in with cheap flowers and a rehearsed expression. "Mom," he mumbled, "you look better." "Yes, son," I replied without looking at him. "Fire purifies, they say." His face turned pale. I saw him swallow hard. For a moment I thought he was going to apologize, but he didn't. The silence between us was a wall. I knew, and he sensed that I knew. Meanwhile, everyone thought I had lost my memory. The nurse, the doctor, the police, they all asked me the same questions. "Do you remember how the fire started? Did you see anyone near the house? Did you leave anything on?" I always answered the same thing. "I don't remember. I just felt the heat." I let them think I was a confused, fragile, disoriented old woman. It was better that way, because a woman who appears weak becomes invisible, and I needed to go unnoticed to act. On the 3rd day, I was discharged. The nurse helped me get dressed. As she did, I felt the weight of the metal box under the hospital gown. No one had noticed it. I had hidden it from day one under the bed, inside the purse they returned to me. That box was my secret and my shield. The true fire slept inside there. When I left the hospital, the fresh air hit my face. I stopped for a few seconds in front of the gate and took a deep breath. I had survived, and that, for some, was a mistake that shouldn't have happened. That afternoon, Robert took me to his wife's house, Jennifer. It wasn't my home, but I feigned gratitude. "You can stay here until we fix the old house," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you, son," I replied. I don't want to be a bother. Jennifer faked kindness, but her actions betrayed her. She gave me a room in the back, far from the kitchen and the hallway. So you can rest, she said in a sweet, almost sickly voice, and we won't bother you. I knew what she was thinking. Better to keep her far away, just in case she remembers something. That night, while pretending to sleep, I heard them talking in the living room. Their voices were knives in the darkness. She shouldn't have survived, Robert. Everything was planned. I know, but I don't know how she got out. If she opens her mouth, we lose everything. She won't. She has no proof. What if she does? She asked nervously. There was a long silence. Then he replied in a low voice, "Then we'll finish what we started." I closed my eyes tightly, not out of fear, but out of resolve. I could no longer hesitate. My son wanted to kill me. The next morning, when I went down for breakfast, I greeted him with a smile. They feigned normalcy, but the atmosphere was thick, artificial. I slept very well, I said, feigning naivety. I hardly have any memories of the fire. Robert watched me cautiously. Maybe that's better, Mum. Forgetting is good. I nodded slowly, like a resigned old woman. Yes, son, you're right. Sometimes it's best to forget. I paused, lowered my gaze, and added in an almost whispered voice, although the heart never forgets what the fire wanted to erase. Jennifer dropped her spoon. Robert tensed up. I kept smiling. The days passed slowly. I took advantage of every moment to observe them. I knew I couldn't trust anyone, but I had patience, the patience of someone who has been sewing the same seam her entire life. During the afternoons, I would sit in the yard with a blanket over my legs and a gentle smile, as if I were a harmless grandmother. But inside, my mind was meticulously planning every step. One afternoon, while they were out shopping, I checked his study. Among his papers, I found a copy of the insurance contract. The fire had been planned. And worse, the beneficiary was Robert. Not me, not his mother, just him. I put a copy in my purse and went back to sit in the yard before they returned. When they came in, Jennifer offered me tea. You should take care of yourself, Mrs. Mary. You've been very quiet lately. Yes, I replied with a calm smile. I'm saving my words for when they're truly needed. She fell silent, uncomfortable. I kept sipping my tea, looking at the stove fire. Fire. Always fire. That night, when I was alone in my room, I opened the metal box. Inside were old documents, some in the name of James, my deceased husband, and others with notary seals, including an envelope with a deed I recognized instantly. The house was in my name, not Robert's, as he believed. I covered my mouth with my hands to keep from laughing. The fire had destroyed the walls, but not the soul of my home, and that paper, intact among the ashes, was the real beginning of my justice. I put everything away again. I lay back in bed and closed my eyes. The sound of the clock marked the rhythm of my thoughts. Every tick was a promise, every tock a warning. The fire hadn't killed me. It had only woken me up. They say fire doesn't start big. It begins with a spark. And when I think of my son, Robert, I always wonder at what exact moment that spark ignited in his soul. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when he would hug me tenderly, when he would call me Mummy, with that sweet voice that melted my heart. But love, when not nourished by values, eventually rots over time. And mine, without me realizing it, raised its own executioner. I remember when he was born. He was a beautiful baby, with big, curious eyes, the living reflection of James, my husband. The early years were happy, simple, full of laughter and the smell of fresh-baked bread. We lived modestly but together. James worked at the town's auto repair shop, and I sewed for the neighbours. We were poor, yes, but poverty didn't hurt as long as love was enough. Robert grew up surrounded by affection. He was always an intelligent child, but also stubborn, with a shadow of pride that showed even in his games. If he lost, he got angry. If I corrected him, he looked at me with resentment. He said he wanted to be someone great, someone who didn't depend on anyone. I thought it was healthy ambition, but it wasn't that. It was ego. And ego, when watered with flattery, grows like the most dangerous weed. When he turned 20 years old, James became ill. The repair shop began to decline, and I was forced to work twice as hard. Robert became cold, distant. He no longer looked us in the eyes. He spent more time in the city, surrounded by new people, and returned occasionally only to ask for money. James always defended him. "He's young, Mary," he would tell me. "He just needs to find his way." But I saw it clearly. His path was made of greed. One night, while James was coughing in his room, Robert burst in, furious. "I'm sick of living like a pauper," he yelled. "You don't understand anything." I tried to calm him. "Son, everything we have belongs to you. Just be patient." He looked at me with contempt. "Patience? When you both die, this house will be mine, and then I'll do what I want." Those words hurt me more than any blow. James heard it from the bed, and his eyes filled with tears. From that night on, something broke between them. When James died, silence took over the house. I cried for months, and Robert didn't cry at all. He showed up at the funeral in a new suit, dark sunglasses, and a frightening coldness. While the neighbours comforted me, he spoke to the notary. To find out about the properties, he said. Barely 2 days had passed since his father's death. When I explained that the house was registered in both our names, he became enraged. "That's not fair. I'm your son, not the paperwork." "No, Robert," I calmly replied. "The paperwork is the only thing that protects what your father built." He didn't speak to me for weeks, and when he returned, he wasn't the same. He had met a woman, Jennifer. Jennifer arrived like a storm, beautiful, ambitious, with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. From the first moment, I knew she wasn't good for him. Her words were sweet, but her actions were calculated. She made decisions for Robert, slowly distancing him from me, and he, blind with love, let himself be molded like an obedient child. I tried to warn him. "That woman only wants you for what you have." He laughed. "What do I have, Mum, when I can barely get by?" "Precisely because of that," I replied. "Because she wants to build on your shoulders." He didn't listen to me. Soon after, they got married. And although I tried hard to maintain peace, I soon discovered that Jennifer was fire disguised as a caress. At first, she treated me with respect, but it only took James's death for her mask to fall. "Mrs. Mary," she said one day while serving coffee, "have you thought about selling the house?" "Selling it?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, it's old, big, hard to maintain. With that money, you could buy something more modern." I smiled without answering, but deep down, I knew something dark was at work. And I wasn't wrong. Weeks later, I overheard a conversation between them. They were in the yard, believing I was asleep. "If we sell the house, we'll have enough to invest," Jennifer was saying. "But it's in my mother's name," Robert replied, annoyed. "Then make her sign something. She loves you. She'll do it without thinking." I closed my eyes and clenched my fists. My heart ached, not because of the plan, but because of how easily she convinced him. My son had not only become ambitious, he had become weak. Months passed. Robert kept insisting on selling. I calmly refused, always with the same answer. Your father asked me not to touch this house. He would grunt, frustrated, and leave. But I knew he wouldn't give up. Until one day he did, or so I thought. Weeks went by without him mentioning the subject. He hugged me on my birthday, brought me flowers. For a moment, I thought I had my son back. But evil is not extinguished with false kisses. It only waits for the right moment to burn again. The night of the fire, when I saw him with the match in his hand, I understood that moment had arrived. There was no doubt. There was no confusion. His eyes told me the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was the end of a long plan, calmly cooked up, fueled by Jennifer and his ambition. And yet that night, as the smoke surrounded me, I didn't feel hatred. I felt pity. Because the fire he thought he was starting in me was actually consuming him years ago. My son didn't burn me to keep a house. He burned me because I was the only mirror in which he could see his shame. When I understood this, everything made sense. My revenge would no longer be to shout his name or accuse him before a judge. It would be to let his own fire devour him, little by little, while mine remained lit, firm, silent. And so, as I lay in bed that night, with the metal box by my side, I swore something to myself. I wouldn't run anymore. I wouldn't cry anymore. I would be the one to decide when the last flame went out. Almost a month passed before they allowed me to return to my house, or what was left of it. The firefighters had finished their reports, the neighbors had stopped whispering, and the world seemed to have forgotten that fire. But not me. I couldn't. When I crossed the rusty gate, the smell of ash still lingered in the air. The wind was kicking up black dust and pieces of wood. Where there was once a home full of life, now there were only ruins and silence. Every step I took sounded like a farewell. However, as I walked among the remains, I felt something different. A cold, firm, powerful calm. The fire hadn't taken my house. It had only taken its mask off. What remained there was the naked truth of what we had been. I entered through the charred frame of the main door. The floor creaked under my shoes. The walls, blackened, seemed to whisper memories. James's laughter, the songs he hummed while cooking, the arguments, the hugs. Everything was still there, trapped between the smoke and the memory. I walked toward the bedroom I had shared with my husband. The fire had been generous with that room. It didn't completely devour it. Some furniture remained standing, twisted, but recognizable. On the floor, the boards in the corner where the metal box had been were loose. Someone had looked for it, someone who hadn't found it. I knelt slowly. I ran my hand over the charred wood. Underneath, something hard hit my fingers. I carefully scraped away the dust and fragments until a second metal cover appeared, older, embedded in the floor. A trapdoor. My heart jumped. I had never seen it, not even when I put away the original box. James had never told me about it. What else had my husband hidden in this house? I ran to find a crowbar in the shed. My hands were trembling, but my soul was guiding me. I inserted the tip into the cracks, and with a sharp squeal, the trapdoor gave way. The air that came out from below smelled of dampness and time standing still. I turned on a small flashlight and carefully descended the 3 steps that led inside. It was a narrow, dark space, full of dust and cobwebs. In one corner, covered with a tarp, there was a small wooden chest. I touched it. cold, solid, ancient. I lifted it with effort and opened it. Inside were old documents, a photo of James with an unknown young man, and a letter. My name was written in his firm handwriting. For Mary, if the fire ever returns. My hands shook as I opened it. The paper was yellowed, but the words were still alive. My love, if you are reading this, it's because something has gone wrong. I never told you everything about my past. Before I met you, I had a different life. There is a young man, a son you don't know. He doesn't carry my last name, but he carries my blood. If you ever feel the fire surrounding you, look to him for the truth. What seems like loss today can be salvation tomorrow. James. I froze. I felt the air rush out of my lungs. A son. James had another son, and if his words were true, could this young man be the rightful heir to everything Robert believed was his? I sat on the floor, the letter pressed against my chest. Suddenly everything took on a different meaning. Destiny, fire, silence. Nothing was a coincidence. I remembered the night James asked me to keep the metal box. His voice trembled, but not with fear, but with remorse. There are things not everyone would understand, Mary, but promise me that if something happens, you will protect what is fair. I had promised without asking. And now, almost 20 years later, I understood what he was really asking of me. I climbed out of the basement with the chest in my arms. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky a deep orange. Shadows lengthened inside the house, and for an instant, I had the feeling that James was watching me from some corner, silently approving. I left the chest on the blackened dining room table and opened it again. In addition to the letter and the photo, there was an envelope with notary seals. I opened it carefully. They were legal documents, property titles, old bank accounts, unregistered wills. And in one of them, a line stood out. In the absence of recognized legitimate heirs, the property will pass to the son, born of James R. Ortiz, and registered under the name of Thomas Ledesma. A chill ran through my body. That name meant nothing to me, but I sensed I would soon know everything. When the sun disappeared, I lit a candle and stayed there, sitting in front of the soft flame. The reflection danced over James's letter. I thought of Robert, of how his ambition had blinded him so much, without him knowing that his entire life was built on a lie that I could now use. Fire, I thought, doesn't just destroy, it also reveals. And what I had found among the ashes was not ruin, it was power. Before leaving, I put the chest in the trunk of the car. As I drove toward Robert's house, the sky darkened and a storm was forming on the horizon. Lightning illuminated the road, and in every flash I could see my son's face reflected in the window, cold, arrogant, disbelieving. I smiled sadly. He thought I was a weak old woman, an obstacle to his ambition, but he would soon discover that the fire he tried to use against me was still alive. Only now it was burning in my favor. That night, upon arriving at Robert and Jennifer's house, I feigned tiredness. They greeted me without enthusiasm. While we were having dinner, he said, "Tomorrow we could go to the property, Mum. Maybe we can rebuild something." "Yes, son," I replied. "I'd love for you to see what the fire couldn't destroy." And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that for the first time, I had the match. The next morning dawned grey, with the sky covered by low clouds and the smell of wet earth after the storm. I woke up early with a strange feeling, not of anxiety, but of clarity. It was as if, after all this time, everything was falling into place. James's secret burned in my mind, not as pain, but as destiny. I knew that sooner or later I had to use it, but not in a hurry. Fire, when stoked calmly, burns deeper. Robert was in the kitchen when I went down. He had a coffee in his hand and a tense look, as if he hadn't slept well. "Good morning, son," I said in a calm voice. "Good morning, Mum," he replied without looking at me. He watched me out of the corner of his eye as I served myself some toast. "I was thinking," he said suddenly, "that maybe we should sell the house property." "Again with that?" I smiled softly. "There's almost nothing left, Robert. It still has value," he insisted. "We could use the money to set up a new place for you, something more comfortable." "More comfortable for me or for you?" I asked without losing the smile. He paused. The silence made him uncomfortable. "I'm just trying to help you," he said in a strained tone. "I know, son," I replied, "but there are things that aren't for sale, even if they are covered in ash." His eyes clouded over. I saw the glint of contained anger, that fire I recognized well, the same fire that once tried to kill me. After breakfast, I went for a walk in the garden, taking with me the coat where I had hidden James's letter and the photo of the unknown man, Thomas Ledesma. The air smelled of wet leaves and a new beginning. I sat under the old lemon tree, the one that had survived the fire, and opened the envelope again. I read and reread my late husband's words, as if every letter taught me how to breathe. "If the fire ever returns, look to him for the truth," James had said. And now I understood that fire was not the flames, but the betrayal, Robert's betrayal, his ambition, his ingratitude. There was no doubt. The son who had tried to burn me was not the true heir of the man who loved me. He was the heir of his own hell. That afternoon, while Jennifer was at the market, I was alone with him. He approached cautiously, as if he feared something had changed. "Mum," he said in a sweet tone I didn't believe, "do you really not remember anything about the fire?" "Sometimes I have dreams," I replied, looking out the window. "I hear screams, I see fire, and a voice calling me, 'Cursed old woman.'" He turned pale. "Maybe it was just a nightmare," he mumbled, trying to disguise it. I looked at him, slowly, with a slight smile. "Yes, maybe. But dreams, Robert, are sometimes just truths the soul remembers before the mind." That night, we ate dinner in silence. Jennifer talked about trivial things, trying to maintain normalcy, but the tension could be cut with a knife. I just watched. Every gesture, every look, every breath. My son no longer slept peacefully. My silence was consuming him more than any accusation. When I finished dinner, I stood up and said, "Robert, I want us to go to the house tomorrow." "To the house?" he repeated, surprised. "Yes, I want to say goodbye to it before deciding what to do." He hesitated for a moment, but nodded. "All right, if that gives you peace." He didn't know that the peace I sought was not for me. It was for my husband, and what he would see the next day would take away the little peace he still had. I didn't sleep that night. I took out James's letter, read it one more time, and then wrote something on the back, in my own handwriting. "The fire you gave me didn't kill me, son. It only showed me who you were." I put the letter back in the box and closed my eyes. I had a plan. Simple, precise, inevitable. At dawn, the sun broke through the clouds like a golden wound. Robert was waiting for me in the car, impatient. During the drive, neither of us spoke. Only the noise of the engine and the echo of our broken history filled the silence. When we arrived, the house was still in ruins, the walls blackened, the roof sunken, the floor covered in debris. We entered slowly, I walked with a firm stride, fearless. He, on the other hand, seemed uneasy. "I don't understand why we're coming back here," he murmured. "So you can learn, son," I said softly. "That fire doesn't destroy everything. Sometimes it leaves things that are worth more than gold." I led him to the master bedroom, the same place where, weeks ago, I had found the hidden chest. He stopped, confused. "What are you looking for?" I looked him in the eyes and replied calmly, "The truth." I opened the door of the charred closet and took the metal box, wrapped in a cloth, out of a corner. He took a step back. "What is that?" "What your father wanted me to keep," I answered. "What the fire didn't dare to touch." I opened the box and showed him the photo of James with the unknown young man. "Do you recognize him?" I asked. "No." "Who is he?" "Your brother." "What?" His face changed, pale, distorted. He took the photo with trembling hands. "This is a lie." "No," I interrupted firmly. "It is the truth your father asked me to keep. And now that you tried to erase my life, it's my turn to give you back what you gave me, the fire." He took a step back, confused, furious. "You're lying to me, you crazy old woman." "No, Robert, I don't lie anymore." I approached slowly. "Do you know what happens with fire, son?" "It burns." I stared at him, letting my words sink in. "But it also illuminates what was hidden." Before continuing, tell me in the comments here what you think of this story so far, and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. He threw the photo on the floor and stormed out. I watched him from the window, seeing the man who was once my son walk away among the rubble, swallowed by his own pride. He didn't chase me, didn't scream, didn't ask for an explanation, because deep down, he knew it was all true. As the wind stirred the ashes around me, I picked up the photo and put it in my pocket. The fire had started again, but this time I was the one controlling it. I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of the wind hitting the bedroom windows sounded like a distant lament, a reminder of everything the fire had failed to destroy. On the table, the metal box lay open, and inside it, the documents my husband had asked me to protect seemed to look at me, demanding to finally be read. For the first time in years, I was afraid of the truth, but I also knew I couldn't continue living without facing it. I took the oldest letter, folded precisely. In the lower corner, the ink had almost faded, but the name was still clear: James R. Ortiz. His firm, rounded handwriting was like hearing him again, speaking to me softly from another time. I lit a candle, brought the letter close to the light, and began to read. "My Mary, if you are reading this, it's because the darkness has entered our home again. I lied to you, and there is no easy way to say it. Before I met you, I loved another woman. Her name was Teresa Ledesma. It was a young, reckless love, full of promises I couldn't keep. When she left, I knew she was expecting my child, but I never heard from them again, until years later, when a young man came looking for me at the shop. His name was Thomas. He didn't call me father, but he was. I offered him help, work, whatever I could. But he didn't want my money, just my truth. I told him everything. Even that I had rebuilt my life with you, that I had another son. He hugged me and left. Since then, I swore to myself that if something ever happened to our family, he would be the one with the right to protect what we built. Because fire, Mary, fire doesn't always come from outside." I fell silent. Tears began to fall without me realizing it. That last sentence echoed in my head like thunder. Fire doesn't always come from outside. James had known it. He had seen something in Robert that I refused to see. The dark shine of selfishness, the germ of destruction. I left the letter on the table and opened the rest of the box's contents. There was an old photograph, James, Teresa, and a boy about 6 years old. The boy had the same eyes as my husband, but also a serene, honest look, different from Robert's. Beneath the photo, another envelope sealed with a bank stamp. Inside, records of accounts I didn't know about, all in the names of James and Thomas Ledesma. A chill ran through my body. My husband had prepared everything: destiny, inheritance, even justice. Only one thing was missing: for me to light the final spark. I put the papers in my purse and sat in front of the mirror. I looked at myself, the wrinkles, the fire scars, the tiredness in my eyes, but also a new strength. It was not that of a fragile or resigned woman, but of someone who understood her purpose. For the first time in a long time, I spoke to myself out loud. No more tears, Mary. Now, only truth. The next morning, I woke up early. Robert was still asleep. Jennifer, with her cheap perfume, was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. I walked past her without greeting her. I took a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "Did you sleep well, Jennifer?" I asked in a calm voice. "Yes, Mrs. Mary," she replied with a fake smile. "And you?" "Perfectly. The dead rest well, you know." Her face changed. She put the spoon down on the table. "What do you mean by that?" I stared at her. "Nothing, dear. I was just thinking about how some things get buried, but they always end up coming to light." Her hand trembled. She knew. Not entirely, but she sensed that something was changing. I enjoyed it. The fear of the guilty is sweeter when served slowly. That same afternoon, I left town for the first time since the fire. I took the bus to the neighbouring city with the documents in my purse and a handwritten address. Ledesma and Ortiz Auto Repair, founded in 1984. The sign was old, but still legible. I walked in slowly. The smell of grease, metal, and smoke brought back memories. A man about 40 years old came out from behind a car. Dark hair, deep gaze. He had James's eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked kindly. "I'm looking for Thomas Ledesma," I said in a trembling voice. "That's me." For an instant, time stood still. It was like looking at James again, but without his guilt. I took the letter out of my purse and handed it to him. "This is from your father." Thomas took it carefully, as if afraid of tearing it. As he read it, I saw his eyes become moist. When he finished, he remained silent for a long time. Finally, he mumbled, "So he never forgot me." "No," I said. "He never did. And now he needs you, even though he's no longer here." I told him everything. The fire, Robert. The betrayal. Thomas listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed and his hands clenched. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "What you are telling me is serious, Mrs. Mary, but I can help you." "I don't want help, son," I replied. "I want justice." He looked at me, surprised. "And what do you want me to do?" "Your father left documents in your name. They belong to you. I want you to come to town, to claim what is yours, so that everything James built returns to the right hands." Thomas nodded seriously. "If that's what he wanted, I will do it." We said goodbye with a hug. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt someone touch me without lies. There was hope, and also new fire. I returned home in silence that night. Robert and Jennifer were having dinner when I walked in. "Where were you?" he asked suspiciously. "Taking a walk," I replied calmly. "I needed to breathe some fresh air." "And did you find what you were looking for?" Jennifer asked, almost mockingly. I looked at her, holding her gaze for a few seconds. "Yes, I found James's son." Both of them froze. The silence became so thick it could be cut. What did you say?" Robert stammered. I smiled. "Nothing, son. Just that fire, when it returns, always knows where to blow." And I walked up the stairs without looking back. I slept soundly that night. For the first time, I didn't dream of flames. I dreamed of water, of rain falling on a new house, clean, without ashes. The fire now had a course, and my soul, a purpose. 2 days later, the town woke up with whispers. A new man had arrived, tall, serious-looking, with the same eyes that were once my husband's. He introduced himself as Thomas Ledesma, the new owner of the repair shop that had been closed for years. The neighbours, curious, quickly connected the names. Ledesma, Ortiz. The last name floated like a spark in the air, igniting suspicion. That morning, while I was having coffee in the kitchen, Robert walked in, agitated. "Who is that guy asking about us?" he asked, throwing the newspaper onto the table. I feigned surprise. "What guy?" "One who claims to be a relative. He says his father was James Ortiz." "Ah," I sighed calmly. "Then he's arrived." He frowned. "Who's arrived?" I looked at him directly, slowly, savouring every word. "The fire, son, the one you lit, and that is now coming for you." Robert stared at me with disbelief. "What are you saying, old woman?" "I'm saying that secrets are not buried under ashes. Sooner or later the wind blows them away." His face changed. It was no longer anger. It was fear. "What did you do?" he yelled at me. "I just returned the fire to its owner." He took a step towards me, but I didn't move. I had spent a lifetime fearing his temper, his voice, his strength. Not anymore. I had walked through the fire. Nothing human could scare me more. "You're a cursed woman," he spat. "No, son. I'm a mother. But you taught me to stop being a victim." That afternoon, Thomas arrived at the house. Jennifer greeted him coldly. "What do you want?" "To see Mrs. Mary Ortiz," he replied politely. When I walked down the stairs and saw him at the door, something inside me softened. His presence filled the house with a peace I hadn't felt in years. It was as if James's soul had returned in that body, firm and fair. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I assume you've read the letter?" "Yes," he nodded. "And the documents too?" He took an envelope from his jacket. "I've spoken with the lawyer. Everything can be resolved legally. But I must warn you, Mrs. Mary, this is going to unleash a storm." I smiled. "Fire doesn't scare me, son. I've already survived the worst of it." As we spoke, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Robert appeared, his face distraught. His eyes darted from Thomas to me, full of fury and confusion. "What does this mean?" he growled. Thomas looked at him calmly. "I am Thomas Ledesma, son of James Ortiz." Robert laughed in disbelief. "Another one of your inventions, Mum. Now you're bringing imposters into the house." Thomas took a step forward. "I have the documents and DNA evidence if you need it." Silence fell like a stone. Jennifer, listening from the hallway, let out a gasp. Robert turned pale. "This can't be." "It is what it always was," I said. "You just never wanted to look." Robert began to tremble. "You're a liar," You always manipulated me. No, son, I said without raising my voice. I just loved you too much. And that's why you took everything from me. I didn't take anything from you. The fire you lit only illuminated the truth. I approached slowly, and for the first time, I placed my hand on his face. It was the same face I had kissed when he was a child, the same one that had cried in my arms when the world hurt him. But there was no trace of that child left. Only the ashes of the man hatred had formed. "Robert," I whispered, "you can still stop." "Stop? From what? From destroying you?" he replied with a bitter smile. "If I'm going to burn, everyone is going to burn with me." That night, the fire returned, not with flames, but with words. Robert went out shouting through the town, saying that we wanted to ruin him, that Thomas was an imposter, that I was crazy. But the rumors were already spreading faster than him. The neighbors knew that something big was cooking, and when lies try to cover up a truth that is burning, the whole town smells the smoke. Jennifer, nervous, came to my room. "Mrs. Mary, is that man really your husband's son?" "Yes." "Then Robert has nothing," I replied. "Only the fire he himself started." She put her hands to her face, trembling. "They're going to take everything from us." I looked at her in silence, and with a calm I didn't even understand, I told her, "No, no one is going to take anything from you. You lost everything the day you helped burn me alive." Her tears fell onto the floor like drops on ash. The next morning, Thomas and I went to the town lawyer. We brought all the papers, the deeds, the letters, the proof of kinship. When we finished signing, he looked at me with respect. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "What is stolen with fire is returned with truth." We left the office, and the air smelled different. It was as if the wind itself had carried away a part of the weight that had been oppressing me for years. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, Robert appeared at the gate. He was distraught, with messy hair, red eyes. "You can't do this to me, old woman," he shouted. "I'm your son." "No, Robert," I said with a firm voice. "You were my son, until you decided to burn the only thing that gave you that right." He took a step toward me, but Thomas intervened. "Don't come any closer," he said calmly. Robert looked at him with pure hatred. "You took everything from me." "No," Thomas replied. "You took it from yourself." The air grew heavy, the sun was descending, staining the courtyard walls red, and for an instant I felt the fire of that night reignite among the three of us. Only this time, I wasn't afraid. Robert left without looking back. His shadow was lost on the dusty road, and the echo of his footsteps mixed with the chirping of the crickets. Jennifer didn't leave the house again that day, and Thomas stayed by my side. "And what will you do now?" he asked, looking at the horizon. I smiled. "Wait. The fire always returns to the place where it started." That night, I sat in the rocking chair in front of the gate, with a blanket over my legs. The wind blew gently, as if caressing my face. I thought of James, of how everything he hid underground had ended up blooming among the ashes. And for the first time, I felt that the circle was closing. I didn't feel hatred, only a deep calm, an ignited peace. Fire was no longer my enemy, it was my witness. The sunrise brought a different air. For the first time in a long time, the sky didn't seem like a threat to me. It was a clear, immense canvas, as if the universe wanted to remind me that there were still clean things left after the smoke. I poured myself coffee and waited in silence. I knew Thomas would come early. We had agreed that this day we would begin with what he called the silent part of the fire. At 0 hour 8 minutes, I heard the engine of his pickup truck in front of the house. I went out to the yard, and seeing him I felt a mixture of nostalgia and strength. He carried a large envelope under his arm and an expression that combined respect and determination. "Did you sleep well?" he asked me. "Enough to dream," I replied with a slight smile, "and not to forget." We went into the kitchen. On the table, Thomas spread out several documents: deeds, notarial acts, certified copies of James's will. "Everything is ready," he said. "Legally, Robert has no rights over the house, the shop, or the accounts." "I know," I replied, "but he still hasn't understood that he lost." "Then what will we do?" "We will wait," I answered. "And when he thinks everything has calmed down, we will let the fire find him." That morning, while we were reviewing the papers, we heard a noise outside. It was Jennifer, returning from town with a haggard face. She had a letter in her hand. "This arrived for you, Mrs. Mary," she said, avoiding eye contact. I took it. It was a court notice. Robert was suing me. He claimed that I was not of sound mind and that the properties should pass to his administration. I smiled calmly. Thomas clenched his fists. "That's outrageous." "No," I said. "It's desperation. When the fire runs out of oxygen, it starts looking for air wherever it can." I folded the letter and put it in the box where I kept James's memories. It no longer hurt. I was no longer afraid. I knew exactly what to do. Over the next few weeks, the entire town became a theatre. Robert walked from house to house, telling his version. "My mother lost her mind," he would say. "That Thomas guy is an imposter. I just want to protect what belongs to me." But empty words quickly fade away when the truth already has roots. Thomas won people over. He helped the neighbors with their cars. He fixed things without charging. He listened without judging. In a few days, the repair shop was full of life again, and the Ortiz name sounded with respect again, but not because of Robert, but because of the man who had truly inherited James's soul. I, meanwhile, remained silent. I didn't respond to the provocations, didn't give explanations. Every day I went to the market, the cemetery, the town diner. I lived my life with the calm of someone who knows that revenge is cooked over a slow fire. Jennifer began to visit me more often. She was no longer haughty or confident. She had lost her shine, her strength. One afternoon, while I was sewing on the porch, she approached me with red eyes. "Mrs. Mary," she whispered, "I didn't know Robert would go so far." I looked up. "Of course you knew, but pretending doesn't hurt any less, does it?" She lowered her head. "I just thought he would change." "Fire doesn't change, Jennifer," I said softly. "It just looks for something new to burn." She burst into tears. I didn't comfort her. Repentance doesn't erase the ashes, it just dampens them. A week later, I received a court summons. The trial would be in 2 weeks. Thomas and I knew that this would be the final scene. He prepared all the documentation with meticulous precision, but what I was preparing was different, older, more human. I went through my old photo albums, James's letters, receipts, the original deeds. I put everything in a folder and placed it next to the letter Robert had sent to sue me. I looked at them together and thought, this is how a circle closes, with the lie and the truth facing each other on the same table. 3 days before the trial, Robert came to see me. I wasn't expecting him. He walked in without knocking, as if he still had rights over that floor. "Mom," he said without looking directly at me, "you still have time to fix this. Fix what? Tell the judge you are confused. That man manipulated you. Are you referring to Thomas? He nodded. He doesn't exist. It's a trap. I let out a brief laugh. The only trap here, son, is the one you set for yourself. His eyes hardened. I'm warning you. If I lose, you'll regret it. I stood up slowly, with the calm of someone who has buried their fear. You already burned me once, Robert. What more could you take from me? Your peace, I smiled. You can't take that, because my peace was born from the fire you lit. He left, slamming the door. His rage was so great that the air smelled of smoke again. The day of the trial arrived. The room was full. The judge, an old man who had known my husband, greeted me with respect. Robert, impeccable in his suit, feigned serenity, but his hands were shaking. Jennifer, sitting behind him, couldn't hold his gaze. Thomas, next to me, patted my shoulder. No matter what happens, you've already won, Mrs. Mary, he whispered. The judge called for silence. Robert spoke first. His speech was a mixture of lies and dramatics. He said I was senile, that Thomas was a con artist, and that he only wanted to protect the family legacy. When he finished, he faked a tear. Some people murmured. Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly, leaning on my cane, and looked at everyone. For 40 years, I lived in that house, I said. I raised a son, loved a husband, and endured more than anyone could imagine. I took the documents out of the folder and placed them on the judge's bench. Here are the original deeds in my name, and here the letter from my husband, where he recognizes his first son, Thomas Ledesma. The judge looked up. The murmuring grew. And in case anyone doubts, I continued, I also brought this. I took a photograph out of my purse. James, Thomas as a child, and me at the repair shop, smiling. My husband didn't hide his son. He waited for him. He loved him. And he asked me to protect him. That's what I have done. Robert stood up, furious. It's a lie. It's a setup. The judge banged the gavel. Silence. I didn't shout. I just looked at him. You know, son, the fire you throw always comes back. And when it does, it no longer burns what you hate, but what you love the most. When the judge announced his decision, the silence was absolute. The house, the repair shop, and the properties legally passed to my name, and by extension, to Thomas Ledesma, as the legitimate heir. Robert lost everything. I left the courthouse walking slowly, the cane in one hand and calm in the other. Thomas caught up with me at the door. Are you all right? Perfectly, I replied. The fire went out where it should. That night I returned home. I sat in front of the window, looking at the clear sky. I thought of James, of Thomas, of the smoke of the past that finally dissipated. And as the moon reflected in the glass, I realized something. Revenge doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it just gives back the light that the fire stole. The days following the trial were quiet. Robert disappeared from the town, and no one knew for sure where he was. At first, I thought he would hide for a while, that pride would force him to flee until he found another victim to blame. But life, sometimes, doesn't wait that long to settle scores. One morning, Mrs. Johnson, my neighbour, knocked on the door. Her face was serious, with that mix of compassion and curiosity that only those who bring bad news have. Mary, they found him. Where? I asked, though I already knew the answer. At the motel down the road. They say he hadn't eaten or slept for days. I looked down. I didn't feel hatred, just an old sadness, similar to weariness. The next day, I went to see him. He was in the hospital, pale, with sunken eyes and his voice almost gone. When he saw me enter, he burst into tears. "Forgive me, Mum. I just wanted to be somebody." I sat beside him. "You were, son, but you got lost looking for fire in the wrong hands." He sobbed, gripping my fingers. I didn't know if he was crying for me or for himself. "I lost everything," he said. "No," I replied. "You still have yourself, if you choose to get up." I hugged him, without resentment, because I understood that my revenge was already fulfilled. I didn't need to destroy him. Life had done it for me. That night, I returned home and lit a candle in front of James's photo. The light flickered gently, warmly, as if the past was breathing with me. I thought about how far everything had gone, how a fire, a secret, and a tired mother had woven her justice in silence. Thomas joined me on the porch. "And what will you do now, Mrs. Mary?" he asked. "Live," I replied with a calm smile. Finally, without fear of the fire. I looked at the stars and knew the story was coming to an end. The flames were no longer a threat. They were a memory. And in every spark that danced in the air, I swore that no lie would ever burn me again. The wind blew warm that morning, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and jasmine. The town had returned to its usual rhythm, with children playing in the square and neighbours greeting each other as if nothing had happened. But I knew. Everything had changed. I was no longer the same woman who trembled in front of her son, or the one who remained silent to avoid conflict. I was different. A woman who had walked through the fire and emerged with her soul intact. From the window, I watched the repair shop that Thomas had restored. The new sign shone under the sun. Ortiz Ledesma Auto Repair. Every time I read it, I felt that James, in some way, was smiling again, his last name and that of his first son together. History, finally, had corrected itself. Thomas came to see me every day. He brought fresh bread, flowers, or simply company. We would sit on the porch and talk about a little of everything: the town, the work, life. Sometimes he would be quiet, looking at the horizon, and say softly, "My father would have been proud of you." I smiled. "And of you too, son. He was waiting for you. He just needed someone to turn on the right light." One afternoon, while tidying the few things I had saved from the fire, I found a small wooden figurine among the debris. It was a hummingbird that James had carved in my first years of marriage. I picked it up, still blackened, and held it between my hands. "Even you survived," I whispered. I cleaned it carefully, placed it on the living room shelf, and for the first time, I felt that my house had a soul again. It wasn't necessary to rebuild the walls. The true reconstruction was happening inside me. That night, I sat in front of the fireplace. The flame danced calmly without rage. The fire was no longer an enemy. I looked at it for a long time, thinking about how much its meaning had changed. Before, I feared it. Now, I understood it. Fire doesn't destroy out of malice. It destroys what should no longer exist. And in my life, it had cleansed everything false, everything sick, everything rotten. Days later, I received a letter from the hospital. It was a notification. Robert had been discharged. I didn't know if he would return to town or go far away, but I felt I had to see him one last time. Not out of resentment, but for closure. I went to the motel where he was staying. The receptionist led me to his room. I knocked on the door. At first there was no answer, but then I heard his voice, weak. "Come in." I entered. The room smelled of dampness and loneliness. Robert was sitting by the window, staring into the void. He had aged 10 years in a few weeks. "Mum," he said faintly. "Hello, son." We remained in silence. There were no words that could undo the road we had travelled. He stood up and clumsily knelt in front of me. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Perhaps not," I replied, "but forgiveness is not given for merit, but for liberation." He put his head in my lap, and for an instant I felt him again as the child I once cradled. I stroked his hair, already greying, and told him in a low voice, "I don't hold hatred, Robert, only pity." "Pity?" "Yes, because you wasted your life looking for fire outside, when the true warmth was always here." I touched his chest. "In the heart, son, yours and mine." He cried. I did not. My tears had already completed their cycle. I just hugged him, with the serenity of someone who no longer expects anything. When I left the motel, the air was cooler. I took a deep breath. The past was staying behind. The fire, finally, was going out. That night I sat in the garden with Thomas. The sky was clear, full of stars. He poured me tea and told me he planned to stay in town. "There's a lot to do," he said, "and besides, I don't want to leave you alone." "I'm not alone, son," I replied. "I've learned to live accompanied by my own peace." He smiled, looking at me tenderly. "Even so, I would like to stay." "Then stay," I said, squeezing his hand. "This house will always have room for true family." We remained quiet, listening to the crickets. The air smelled of damp earth and hope. For the first time in years, I felt neither guilt nor pain, only gratitude. At dawn, I returned to the cemetery. I brought fresh flowers and left them on James's grave. "I did it, love," I told him. "Everything is back in its place." The wind blew gently and the flowers moved as if they were answering me. I smiled. Our son returned, the real one, and the other one. He finally understood what he did. I stayed for a while looking at the horizon. I thought about how easy it is to get lost when love is contaminated with greed. I thought of all the mothers who are silent, those who endure out of fear, those who forgive without being forgiven. And I felt that my story was no longer just mine. It belonged to all of them. I walked back slowly. Every step on the earth reminded me that I was alive, that the fire had not been my end, but my rebirth. That night, I lit the fireplace for the last time. The flame illuminated the freshly painted walls, the clean portraits, the table with bread and coffee. Everything in its place. Everything at peace. Thomas was in the repair shop, locking the doors. I heard him whistling a song his father used to sing while working, and involuntarily I started humming it too. The fire crackled softly. I lay back in the rocking chair, watching the dance of the light. Life had been hard, yes, but also fair. I smiled. Fire no longer scared me. Now it was my friend, my guardian, my mirror, and as the flame slowly went out, I murmured softly, almost like a prayer. Nothing is lost in the fire if the heart continues to burn with truth. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I rested. Sometimes life burns us to teach us how to be reborn. I thought the fire was my punishment, but in reality, it was my teacher. It showed me who I was, who should stay, and who should leave. And although it hurt, it left me more alive than ever. That's why, if you are listening to my story, I want you to remember this. Never fear the fire that tests you, because fire only destroys what is useless, but it purifies what is valuable. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. Like the video and comment down below what city you are watching us from. Your support helps me continue sharing stories of life, strength, and hope. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for listening to me, for feeling with me, for understanding. And that was my story.